In the 1990s, something began happening in India that almost no one noticed at the time. The vultures were disappearing. Not gradually, not one species, all of them, across the entire subcontinent, in a collapse so rapid and so complete that when researchers finally understood what was happening, 99% of the population was already gone. What followed was not only an ecological disaster, it was a public health catastrophe. Rabies cases in India rose by tens of thousands. Stray dog populations, feeding on the carcasses that vultures had previously cleaned, exploded across cities and villages. Anthrax outbreaks increased. Waterborne diseases spread more easily. By conservative estimates, the collapse of India's vulture population caused the deaths of hundreds of thousands of human beings. Not from vultures, from the absence of vultures. This is not the story you were told about this bird. The story you were told involves a hunched silhouette on a dead tree, a naked head, a beak stained red, the smell of something rotting. A creature associated with death, with filth, with the end of things. That image is accurate, and it is almost completely misleading. The vulture is one of the most sophisticated sanitation systems ever produced by biological evolution. Her stomach neutralizes pathogens that would kill almost any other animal on Earth. Her eyesight is 8 times sharper than ours. She can glide for hundreds of kilometers without flapping her wings, detecting a single carcass from thousands of meters in the air. And she performs, freely and continuously, a function so important that when she disappears from a landscape, human beings begin to die. This episode is about the bird we built an entire mythology of ugliness around, and what happens when that mythology collides with reality. The vulture is not a harbinger of death. She is one of the reasons death does not spread as easily as it otherwise would, and we came very close, in 1 decade, to losing her. Chapter 1: The Biology of a Perfect Sanitation Engineer. There are 23 species of vulture in the world. They are divided into 2 major groups: Old World vultures in Africa, Europe, and Asia, and New World vultures in the Americas. They look alike, they behave alike, they fill the same ecological role, and yet they are not closely related. The 2 groups evolved their vulture-like features independently from different ancestors on different continents over tens of millions of years. This is what biologists call convergent evolution. When the environment presents a specific job, in this case, cleaning up large dead animals before they become a disease vector, natural selection often produces the same solution multiple times. The vulture, it turns out, is the solution. Let us start with the eyes. A vulture's eyes are approximately 8 times sharper than human vision. She can detect a carcass the size of a rabbit from 4 kilometers in the air. She can distinguish the specific posture of a dying animal from a living one and identify it as a future food source before anyone else arrives. Her vision is also color sensitive in ranges we do not access. She can detect the subtle shifts in vegetation color that indicate decomposition is beginning beneath a plant canopy. She can see patches of disturbed soil that suggest recent predator activity. These capacities are not for hunting. They are for reading the landscape at scale, from altitude, across vast territories. Then the flight. A vulture spends most of her life airborne, and she does it almost without muscular effort. She rides thermal columns, rising currents of warm air produced by sunlight heating the ground. She circles within the column, gaining altitude. Then she glides on extended wings to the next thermal, covering enormous distances with minimal energy expenditure. A griffon vulture has been tracked flying over 500 kilometers In a single day, without a single wing flap, aeronautical engineers study vulture flight for applications in long-endurance drone design. The energy efficiency of a soaring vulture exceeds the efficiency of any human-designed aircraft of comparable size. And then, the head. The vulture's head is famously bare, almost completely featherless in most species. And for most of human history, this has been the feature that made the bird seem grotesque. The lack of feathers is not a cosmetic accident. It is one of the most elegant sanitary adaptations in the animal kingdom. When a vulture feeds on a carcass, she often inserts her entire head into the body cavity, reaching organs and tissues that other scavengers cannot access. A fully feathered head would become matted with blood, fluids, and decomposing tissue. Those residues would harbor bacteria, parasites, and fungi. A bare head dries quickly in the sun. Ultraviolet radiation further sterilizes the skin. The vulture emerges from a meal that would leave almost any other animal carrying a dangerous pathogen load, essentially clean. She is a medical professional in flight, dressed for surgery. Her feet, by contrast, are relatively weak. Unlike hawks, eagles, and owls, birds that grip and kill their prey with their talons, a vulture's feet are adapted for walking on the ground and stabilizing herself at a carcass. She does not hunt. She does not kill. She processes what is already dead. This distinction matters. It places her in a specific ecological niche that very few other animals occupy. She is not a predator. She is not a competitor for living prey. She is a specialist in the transformation of death into harmless soil chemistry. The vulture is, in the most precise biological sense, an ending. She closes the loop. She returns what was alive to the system that produced it. And she does it so efficiently that most ecosystems cannot function properly without her. Chapter 2. The Disappearance. What happened in India? For most of the 20th century, India had approximately 80 million vultures. This is an extraordinary number. Consider that the total vulture population across Europe today is measured in tens of thousands. India, in the 1980s, had a population of these birds comparable to the human population of several mid-sized countries. 3 species dominated the landscape: the Indian vulture, the slender-billed vulture, the white-rumped vulture, at the time considered one of the most abundant large raptors on Earth. They roosted on ancient trees in villages. They circled over cattle pastures. They cleaned the carcasses of livestock, of dogs, of wildlife, of everything that died across a country of 1.25 billion people. And then, in the early 1990s, they began to die. At first, no one understood what was happening. Vultures were turning up dead beneath roosting trees. They seemed healthy one day and collapsed the next. Post-mortem examinations showed massive kidney damage, a condition called visceral gout, where uric acid crystals accumulate in the internal organs. The pattern was consistent. The cause was unknown. By the late 19s, ornithologists were raising the alarm. The populations were not simply declining, they were vanishing. Researchers who had spent their careers studying Indian vultures were watching their subjects disappear in real time. By 2007, less than 15 years after the first deaths, the white-rumped vulture population had fallen by 99.9%. The Indian vulture had fallen by 97%. The slender-billed vulture had fallen by 95%. This was not gradual decline. This was collapse. One of the fastest population crashes of a vertebrate species in recorded ecological history. The cause when it was finally identified in 2003, was a veterinary drug called diclofenac. Diclofenac is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory. In humans, it is a common painkiller. In the 1990s, an affordable veterinary version began to be used widely across Indian agriculture to treat inflammation, pain, and fever in cattle. When a cow treated with diclofenac died of age, of disease, of injury, her body was left for the vultures, and the vultures ate it. Diclofenac is extraordinarily toxic to vultures. The dose required to kill a bird weighing 5 kilograms is vanishingly small. A single contaminated carcass could kill dozens of vultures at once, the entire flock that gathered around it. In a country with 300 million head of cattle and a veterinary industry that had quietly adopted a new drug without anyone studying its environmental consequences, the math was catastrophic. 80 million birds, 15 years, one drug. The response, when the cause was finally identified, was rapid. India banned veterinary diclofenac in 2006. Pakistan and Nepal followed shortly after. Alternative drugs, meloxicam in particular, were introduced. Captive breeding programs were established to preserve what remained of the populations. Slowly, over the next 2 decades, the decline stopped. The recovery has been far slower. Vulture reproductive biology is not built for rapid rebounds. They reach sexual maturity at 5 to 7 years of age. They lay only 1 egg per year. A population reduced by 99% does not return to previous levels within a human lifetime. Today, estimated vulture populations in India are a small fraction of what they were in the 1980s. Recovery is happening, but the landscape they once dominated is still largely empty of them. And during the years when the vultures were disappearing, when the ecological service they provided was being withdrawn silently from the Indian subcontinent, a public health disaster was unfolding that almost no one connected to the birds. We will examine that disaster in the next chapter, but the summary is this. In attempting to treat sick cows, we nearly exterminated one of the most important public health systems in South Asia. We did it without knowing what we were doing, and we did it in time measured in a single human generation. Chapter 3. The stomach that neutralizes anything. To understand why the disappearance of vultures was a public health catastrophe, you have to understand what their stomachs can do. The pH of a vulture's stomach acid is approximately 1. Human stomach acid, by comparison, has a pH of around 2. The stomach acid of a dog is around 1.5. The stomach acid of a vulture is more acidic than any other vertebrate on Earth, approaching the acidity of battery acid. This is not an incidental detail of vulture biology. It is the single feature that makes her irreplaceable. A vulture eats things that would kill almost any other animal. She eats carcasses infected with anthrax, the bacterial disease that forms spores capable of surviving in soil for decades. She eats animals dead from rabies, from botulism, from cholera, from salmonella, from bovine tuberculosis, from every pathogen that commonly circulates in livestock and wildlife populations. Her stomach acid neutralizes them, destroys them, reduces them to harmless protein. What enters her digestive system as a biohazard leaves it as nitrogen-rich droppings suitable for soil fertilization. No other animal does this at scale. Hyenas and wild dogs can tolerate some of these pathogens, but not all and not reliably. Crows and rats will feed on carrion, but are themselves vectors for disease transmission. Domestic dogs, when they scavenge, often become infected and spread the infection to humans. The vulture is the only large vertebrate that can consistently consume a dangerously infected carcass and not become a disease vector herself. And she does it faster than anyone else. A flock of vultures can reduce a carcass the size of a cow to bones in approximately 30 minutes. 30 minutes. A carcass that would otherwise lie in a field for days or weeks, attracting insects, contaminating water sources, breeding pathogens, is gone before the microbial populations have time to multiply significantly. Biologists describe this as the vulture sanitation service. In ecosystems with healthy vulture populations, the rate of pathogen transmission from dead animals to living ones is dramatically reduced. Carcasses are processed before they can become infection hubs. The organic material is returned to the soil in a form that cannot spread disease. Estimates of the economic value of this service vary by region and by methodology, but across large parts of Africa, Asia, and Europe, the figure runs into billions of dollars per year in avoided livestock losses, avoided human medical costs, and avoided environmental remediation. And that is before accounting for the lives saved. When vultures disappear, their work does not simply stop. Other species try to do it instead. Stray dogs multiply to exploit the new food source. Rats multiply. Feral pigs multiply. These are the second-tier scavengers, the animals that step in when the first-tier specialists are gone. They are not as good at the job. They are slower. They do not sterilize what they consume. They carry the pathogens forward, into human settlements, into water supplies, into the bodies of people who have never heard of vultures and do not know why the system protecting them has failed. This is the context in which the public health consequences of the Indian vulture collapse must be understood. The vultures were gone, but carcasses remained, and the disease burden moved. Chapter 4. The Invisible Service. What vultures prevent every single day. India, in the 1980s, had a feral dog population of approximately 7 million. By 2015, 2 decades after the vulture collapse, that population had grown to approximately 60 million. The correlation is not coincidental. The carcasses that vultures had previously processed did not disappear when the vultures did. They remained in the landscape. They accumulated along roadsides, at livestock dumping grounds, at the edges of villages, and dogs moved in to feed on them. A food source that supported tens of millions of vultures for centuries began, instead supporting an exploding population of stray dogs. A population that, unlike vultures, carries rabies. A population that, unlike vultures, interacts directly with humans. The consequences followed a mathematical logic that epidemiologists could trace precisely. Rabies cases in India began to rise through the 1990s and 2000s. A 2008 study published in the journal Ecological Economics attempted to quantify the health costs of the vulture decline. The researchers calculated that the collapse had caused an estimated 47,000 additional human deaths from rabies between 1993 and 2006. 47,000 people over 13 years from the disappearance of a bird. And rabies was not the only consequence. Anthrax outbreaks increased in regions where vulture populations had collapsed. Anthrax spores, which vultures had previously consumed and destroyed, now remained in carcasses, contaminating soil, water, and the animals that subsequently grazed in the area. Cattle deaths from contaminated water sources increased. Losses from livestock disease rose. Rural economies, particularly in regions dependent on free grazing animal husbandry, absorbed costs that no one had anticipated because no one had understood the service the vultures were providing. The same study estimated the total economic cost of the Indian vulture decline in medical expenses, livestock losses, and related damages at over $30 billion between 1993 and 2006. $30 billion because of the unintended consequences of a veterinary painkiller. Most of the people affected by these consequences had never seen the connection. They knew that stray dogs were a problem. They knew that rabies was worse than it used to be. They had never once thought about the birds that used to circle overhead. The invisible service became visible only in its absence. This pattern, once observed, has been documented elsewhere. In parts of Africa, populations of several vulture species have declined by over 90% in the last 3 decades. Through poisoning by poachers who kill vultures to prevent them from revealing the locations of illegally killed elephants, through collision with power lines, through habitat loss, through similar veterinary drug contamination. In each of these regions, epidemiologists are now beginning to document similar public health consequences: increased stray dog populations, increased disease transmission, increased livestock losses. In Europe, where vultures were hunted nearly to extinction through the 20th century before being partially restored by conservation programs, the ecological costs of their absence are now better understood. Animal carcasses in the Alps, for example, used to be processed by griffon vultures within hours. In regions where vultures remain absent, carcasses can lie for weeks, requiring costly intervention by farmers and public health authorities. The vulture is not a charismatic conservation species. She does not generate the public sympathy of a panda, a tiger, or a polar bear. She does not appear on tourism brochures. She is not used to sell children's books. This has been her problem, not her inadequacy. Conservation programs have historically received funding proportional to public sentiment. Beautiful animals get money. Useful animals often do not. The vulture, by any objective measure of ecological importance and medical value, deserves to be near the top of the list of species humanity invests in protecting. She is not near that list at all. The invisible workers of the natural world rarely are. Chapter 5. The Paradox. How one veterinary drug nearly extinguished a species. There is a lesson buried in the story of the Indian vulture collapse that deserves to be stated explicitly. No one intended to kill the vultures. No pharmaceutical company set out to exterminate a species. No farmer who administered diclofenac to a sick cow was thinking about the birds. No government agency that approved the drug for veterinary use considered the downstream ecological consequences. The catastrophe was the product of countless small, reasonable decisions, each of which seemed entirely benign in isolation, combining into an outcome that was, at scale, disastrous. This is how most ecological disasters actually happen. Not through malice, not through ignorance in the narrow sense, through the accumulation of decisions made by people who did not know and had no easy way to find out what the consequences would be. Diclofenac was approved for human use decades before it was applied to livestock. It had been tested on humans. It had been tested on laboratory animals. It was considered a safe, effective, widely prescribed medication. What had not been tested, what nobody had thought to test, was its effect on the birds that would eventually consume the carcasses of treated animals. There was no mechanism in the regulatory system for anticipating that kind of question. Pharmaceutical approval tests for effects on humans, and sometimes on livestock. It does not ordinarily test for effects on scavengers who eat the body after the livestock dies. And yet the test, inadvertently, was run at continental scale on the population of an entire genus of bird, with results that became visible only after 99% of the population was gone. This is the kind of blind spot that characterizes our relationship with many of the species that perform ecological services we depend on. We do not monitor them systematically. We do not understand in advance what their presence contributes. We assume they will always be there, until suddenly they are not. Bees, earthworms, corals, amphibians, bats, and vultures. Each of these groups has suffered dramatic population declines in recent decades. Each of them provides ecological services that are either difficult or impossible to replicate technologically. Each of them has been damaged by human activity that, in isolation, seemed unrelated to them. The vulture collapse is one of the few cases where the cost of that damage has been quantified in human lives and financial terms. Most of the time, we do not know what we are losing because we never measured what we had. There is one more dimension to the vulture story that is worth sitting with. The disappearance of vultures did not only cause a public health crisis, it caused a cultural crisis. In India, vultures were part of the visual landscape of rural and urban life for thousands of years. Their silhouettes on distant trees, their circling patterns in the afternoon sky, their presence at livestock dumping grounds, all of this was ordinary. It was the background against which daily life took place. Then one day, it was not. A generation of Indians has grown up without vultures. They have no cultural memory of the birds. The sky they look at is simply empty, where, for their grandparents, it was full. Shifting baseline syndrome, the phenomenon by which each generation accepts the depleted world it inherits as normal, has done its work. The next generation will not know what was lost, and so they will not know what to protect unless we tell them, which is, in a sense, what this episode is for. In Mumbai, on top of a hill called Malabar, there is a complex of circular stone structures called the Towers of Silence. They are approximately 2,500 years old in design. The specific towers on Malabar Hill have been in use for 4 centuries. They belong to the Parsi community, followers of Zoroastrianism, one of the oldest religions in the world, brought to India by Persian refugees over 1,000 years ago. In Zoroastrian belief, the elements are sacred. Fire must not be contaminated. Earth must not be contaminated. This creates a specific problem at the end of life. A corpse cannot be cremated. That would pollute fire. It cannot be buried. That would pollute earth. It cannot be placed in a river. That would pollute water. So, the Parsis developed a different solution. They built circular stone platforms open to the sky. When a member of the community died, the body was washed, wrapped in white cloth, and placed on the platform. Within hours, vultures, which had roosted on nearby trees and in the surrounding hills for centuries, would descend. Within 30 minutes, the body would be bones. The bones would bleach in the sun. Eventually, they would be pushed into a central well and returned to mineral form. No fire contaminated, no earth contaminated, no water contaminated. For over 1,000 years, this ritual worked. It was one of the most ecologically elegant funerary practices ever devised by human civilization. Then the vultures disappeared. By the early 2000s, the Parsi community in Mumbai was facing a crisis that no one had ever anticipated. The vultures did not come anymore. Bodies placed on the Towers of Silence lay untouched. Decomposition proceeded slowly in the open air under the tropical sun. The smell drifted down the hill into one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in India. For the first time in the history of the community in India, the ritual was failing. The Parsis tried solar concentrators. They tried aviaries to breed captive vultures and release them near the towers. With partial success, they tried to bring the birds back. But the population had collapsed. A civilization-scale relationship between a religious community and a species of bird maintained for millennia had been severed by the unintended consequence of a veterinary drug used on livestock 100 miles away. The Parsi community faces a decision that few communities ever have to make. Do they adapt their ritual to a world without vultures? Do they wait for the birds to return, potentially over generations? Do they accept that an ancient way of handling the dead may no longer be possible through no failure of their own, but through the ecological disappearance of a species they depended on? Religious traditions are not arbitrary. They encode relationships with people, with places, with animals that share the land. When one of those relationships breaks, the tradition itself is threatened. And in this case, the break was not caused by the community. It was caused by everyone else. There is something worth noting in this story. We tend to think of human civilization and the natural world as separate domains, the built environment on one side, wildlife on the other. The Parsi story demonstrates that the separation is, in many cases, fictional. Human cultural practices can depend on ecological conditions in ways we are only beginning to map. Rituals that seem entirely symbolical partnerships, a species we dismiss as unimportant, may, without our realizing it, be holding up traditions we consider sacred. The vulture was not just an ecological worker. She was a collaborator in a human religious practice that had lasted longer than most nations have existed. When she disappeared, she took something with her, something no legislation or captive breeding program can fully restore. There is a version of this story that is only about ecology, food webs, public health, billions of dollars in economic cost. But there is another version, one that is about what we owe each other across species lines, and what happens when that debt goes uncollected for too long. The towers of silence on Malabar Hill are still there. The platforms are still maintained. The community still hopes. And somewhere in the hills of the Indian subcontinent, small captive-bred populations of the white-rumped vulture and the Indian vulture are slowly, generation by generation, rebuilding what was almost lost. Closing, the bird you will never see the same way again. The next time you see one circling high above a highway or roosting in a bare tree at the edge of a field, stop. What you are looking at is not a symbol of death. What you are looking at is one of the most sophisticated public health systems ever evolved by the natural world. That bird has eyes 8 times sharper than yours. She can glide for 500 kilometers on a single thermal column. She can eat a carcass infected with anthrax and walk away clean. She is doing, quietly, for free, every day, the work that would otherwise cost human societies billions of dollars and tens of thousands of lives. She is asking for nothing. She has asked for nothing for millions of years. We did not notice she was doing this work until we accidentally almost killed her. And then we noticed, very suddenly, at enormous cost, what the absence of her work looked like. Rabies rose, cattle died, water sources became contaminated. A sacred ritual maintained for 1,000 years began to fail. And then we understood, belatedly, imperfectly, at the cost of tens of thousands of human lives. The vulture does not need to be loved. She does not need to be rebranded or made beautiful or reframed as something she is not. She needs to be recognized as what she actually is, a bird who has been cleaning up after us and after the rest of the natural world since long before humans existed. A bird whose absence is measurable, quantifiable, and devastating. We came close, in one generation, to losing her across an entire subcontinent. Many of her species remain critically endangered. Several are still declining. The work of restoring what was almost destroyed will take decades and may, in some cases, never fully succeed. This is the world we have inherited, a world where ecological services we never acknowledged can be withdrawn without warning because of decisions made by people who had no idea what they were doing. The vulture is not a warning from the past. She is a warning about how we treat the species we do not bother to understand, until understanding them becomes urgent and then too late. The next episode of Wild Purpose, an insect most people try to kill on sight, one of the most universally disliked animals on Earth, a symbol of dirt, of disease, of everything unclean. An insect whose larvae are used in modern medicine to clean wounds that no antibiotic can heal? Whose species pollinate crops that bees cannot reach? Whose role in the decomposition of organic matter is measurable at planetary scale? The fly. This was Wild Purpose.